Alright everyone, so we've had the iPhone 14 lineup for a couple of months now. We've got to play with them. We've gotten to see the difference between now the iPhone 14 and the 14 Pro lineup. They removed the iPhone mini from the lineup totally and forwent that one for the iPhone 14 Plus, which is a new variant in that cheaper lineup. But now that we've had those for a couple months, we gotta start talking about the iPhone 15 because I think a lot of people skipped out on the iPhone 14 lineup, myself included, hoping that the iPhone 15 lineup is going to be everything that we want and then some. And we got some cool features coming down for both the 15 and the 15 Pro lineup. So without further ado, let's talk about everything we know so far, which again, we're still 9 months out, but I think we have a pretty accurate interpretation of what is going to be coming with the iPhone 15 lineup. Let's get into it. So let's start off by talking about the iPhone 15 and the iPhone 15 Plus lineup. So Apple's going to do the same thing they did this year with the iPhone 14s. They're going to forego the mini model totally and stay with the iPhone 15 Plus, even though the Plus model was probably one of Apple's worst selling iPhones to date. Apple's going to double down and go with that. This is the same thing Apple did with the iPhone mini lineup. They started with the 12. Sales weren't as great as they thought, but they kept it going with the 13, so no difference there. We're going to have a 6.1 and a 6.7 inch display, respectively, with the 15 and 15 Plus models. But one thing that's going to be coming to the 15 models, according to Ross Young, is that Dynamic Island is actually going to come down to the regular 15 and 15 Plus, even though it's only been out for a year. I originally thought that the Dynamic Island would eventually get down to like the normal versions of the iPhone, but probably 2 or 3 years down the line. But it does make sense because when Apple first introduced the notch on the iPhone 10, it only took them a year to come out with the iPhone XR, which did bring that same notch over to a cheaper version of the iPhone. So the same thing is going to happen here with the new iPhone 15 and 15 Plus. They will get Dynamic Island, but again, according to Ross Young, it still does not mean that it's going to get ProMotion. So it will not be an LTPO display, which means there won't be an always-on display functionality, and then also it's not going to be ProMotion, so you're still going to have a 60Hz display, which again, in 2023, at a probably $800 and $900 price point, is going to have a lot of the tech community PO'd, but at the same time, the average consumer is not going to know or care about a 60 versus 120 Hz display. But keep that in mind, we will be getting Dynamic Island, which is a huge plus to give it that premium feel and look. We will not be getting 120 Hz or, like I said, the always-on display. So that's the size and displays of the iPhone 15 lineup. There's still a lot of speculation as to what colors we're going to get, so leave some comments down below of what colors you would want Apple to release with the new iPhone 15 and 15 Plus. But one major difference that's going to be coming to this lineup of iPhones is that finally in 2023, there's like a 99.9% certainty that Apple's going to go USB-C with the iPhones finally, which for me is going to be a huge thing because I hate carrying around lightning cables. I never carry around lightning cables. I pretty much use MagSafe and wireless charging to charge my iPhone at all times. So being able to carry around just one USB-C cable to charge my MacBook, charge my iPad, and now charge my iPhone is going to be a game changer, especially with all these quick charging bricks that are coming out. So from a connectivity and charging perspective, expect USB-C on the 15 and 15 Plus models, and we'll talk about the 15 Pro in a little bit because they're also going to get a nice little upgrade from that same situation. And then from a camera standpoint, we aren't expecting anything new. Apple's probably going to improve the hardware and software, or either or, depending on what they want to do with the 15 and 15 Plus models. But I think from a year-to-year iteration from the 14 to the 15, just adding Dynamic Island and USB-C to an iPhone 15 is going to be more than enough from a hardware perspective to make people want to upgrade, especially if they're coming from a 13. Because again, a lot of people skipped out on the 14 lineup because there wasn't too much of a difference, especially in the less expensive iPhone lineup. There just wasn't a year-to-year difference. Like literally, I put an iPhone 14 case on my wife's iPhone 13 because they are the exact same hardware. And then finally, from a performance standpoint, do expect Apple to move the A16 Bionic from the 14 Pro lineup into the iPhone 15 and 15 Plus to give it a nice little performance boost. And again, that's pretty much what's going to happen on a year-to-year basis. This past year with the iPhone 14 lineup was the first time Apple only upgraded the Pro models and not the non-Pro models. So we're going to get the A16 on the iPhone 15 and 15 Plus, and then probably an A17 on the Pro models. But that is pretty much the roundup of the 15 and 15 Plus. So new USB-C port, Dynamic Island, but no 120 Hz or variable refresh rate. So keep that in mind. And then obviously we'll probably get some new colors, new A16 Bionic chip, and then probably some sort of camera upgrades, just not a crazy difference year to year. So now let's talk iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max, if that's even what they're going to name it. But from a design standpoint, a size standpoint, a screen size standpoint, everything is going to remain exactly the same for the most part, right? It's going to have the same design, it's going to have that same Dynamic Island, the ProMotion, the LTPO display to allow for an always-on display. all that's going to be the same thing, just probably perfected a little bit more, right? Apple's going to iterate on it, make sure that they're perfecting that technology with the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max. One thing that Ming-Chi Kuo did state from a design and hardware standpoint is that Apple might be moving away from the physical buttons on the sides of the phone. So if you guys remember from the iPhone, I believe it was the iPhone 4S, the iPhone 5, or maybe the 5 to the 6, they replaced the actual home button that used to be an actual clicking button into a haptic feedback button. So it was kind of just a piece of glass that still felt like you were pressing a button, but it wasn't actually moving at all. And Apple does this extremely well with their trackpads on their laptops as well. So Apple might be doing that for the volume rockers next year. But I can see Apple doing that, where the buttons seem like they're going to be there on the side, but when you click it, you'll feel some haptic feedback to go up and down in volume, but you actually won't be physically pushing down on the buttons. But again, that's just speculation from Ming-Chi Kuo, which I think Apple could bring over knowing how good their haptic engine is and how they've done this in the past. But from a performance and feature standpoint, what does it mean for the user? It just means that there's one less clicky button, which means less room for error, but I've never actually had those buttons fail on me at any point. So again, to each their own. And then to continue on with the hardware updates, like I mentioned with the 15 and 15 Plus, Apple will be putting USB-C on the Pro and Pro Max of the 15 models. But it's not just going to be USB-C, supposedly it's going to be a Thunderbolt port, which again, Thunderbolt port allows for much faster data pass-through speeds, and I think it's going to be a very great transition over to Thunderbolt on the iPhone, because if you're dealing with that 48 megapixel camera on the iPhone, you have 100 to 150 megabyte files of one image. So if you take 10, 15, if you take 100 of those images, you're dealing with 10 to 20 gigs of photos when you have 100 of those images taken. So being able to move them quickly from device to device, Thunderbolt cable is going to work wonders for that, because AirDrop can only take you so far. Even though I use AirDrop a lot, once I start dealing with large gig files, it slows down heavily. So having a Thunderbolt port to be able to just plug in, let's say from an iPhone to an iPad or iPhone to a MacBook, is going to be a game changer for creatives and a game changer for anybody just trying to move photos off their device onto some sort of hard drive. And gone will be the lightning cable, finally. USB-C and Thunderbolt in theory will allow for faster charging speeds. Now whether Apple's going to implement that or not, because they could go as high as 45, 65 watt charging on the iPhone, but let's see what Apple does with the fast charging, because right now the max output or max wattage that you can charge any iPhone is, I believe, 27 watts. So keep that in mind, some faster charging will be a welcome addition. And then when it comes to cameras on the 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max, Apple this year with the 14 Pro and 14 Pro Max was the first time that they included a 48 megapixel camera. So it was the first time in I think 6, 7, 8 years that they upgraded from their 12 megapixel shooter. So that was a big hardware upgrade that Apple's taking advantage of on the software side as well. But with the 15 Pro and Pro Max, the 15 Pro is supposed to with the same camera system from last year, but the 15 Pro Max, which might be renamed at some point, could be the 15 Ultra or whatever the case may be. There is a rumor, according to Ming-Chi Kuo, that they're adding a periscope lens into the larger version of the Pro Max model, which would segregate the Pro lineup, which is something that Apple already does with their iPad Pro. So the 11-inch iPad Pro does not have that mini LED display versus the 12.9-inch iPad Pro. Even though they're both Pro model iPads, the only real difference used to be the size, but then eventually with the M1 iPad Pro, they included that mini LED display on the larger Pro model, not on the 11-inch model. So Apple could do the same thing with their iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max, giving the Pro Max that periscope lens, which would allow for up to 5x optical zoom. So you'll now have a 0.5, a 1, a 2, a 3, and then a 5x zoom built directly into the camera, which is all optically enabled from the lenses. And then lastly, from a chipset standpoint, we should be getting an A17 Bionic, and this will be the first time that Apple goes with that 3nm process, making everything a lot smaller, which means they can have more transistors in there, which means they can do more things at once. I'm sure Apple will put up a graph saying like, this is 1,000,000 times faster than the first iPhone, it's 10x faster than the last iPhone, allowing us to compute so many more things in a millisecond time. But at the end of the day, it just means things are just going to run a little bit smoother for you if you are coming from an older model iPhone. So that is pretty much a roundup of what we know of the iPhone 15 lineup that should be coming out in September of 2023. Now, I think a lot of these are viable, right? USB-C to all iPhones with Thunderbolt to the Pro models, getting the dynamic island on the cheaper iPhones to get some sort of familiarity across the entire board, but Apple will probably still keep around the iPhone 14 lineup. So we can see a lot of different things happening next year. So Apple could also, like I mentioned, change up the naming structure of the iPhones. So we'll have the 15 and the 15 Plus, then we'll have the 15 Pro, and then probably a 15 Ultra to match things like the Apple Watch Ultra. Well, it's still going to be a Pro level device, it'll just have even more features that the iPhone 15 Pro won't have. But that begs a question, will they also have a 15 Pro Max and a 15 Ultra? That's another thing that we're going to have to find out as time goes on. But the final lineup should be the iPhone 15 models, one version of the iPhone 14, we'll have the iPhone 13 and 13 mini, an iPhone SE, and then that's pretty much it. Who knows, maybe Apple might keep around the iPhone 12. We could also see a brand new iPhone SE that is going to look a lot like the old iPhone XR. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Are you somebody that held off from the iPhone 14 lineup like myself to wait for these iPhone 15s? I think it's going to be great to get Dynamic Island down to the iPhone 15 lineup at that $700-800 price point, because I do think the Dynamic Island is cool. It's more gimmicky than actual function, but it is very cool to have there. And I don't know, from a design standpoint, I really like the Dynamic Island. So I'm excited to get it with the iPhone 15 and 15 Pros. But that's going to do it, everybody. Leave some comments down below. If you did make it to the end, leave a little dolphin in the comments down below. And you guys want to watch some more videos on iPhone, iPad, and Mac, click on one of these videos right here. And until next time, I'm Fernando. I'm out of here. Peace.